I'm a 27-year-old woman named Christina. My mother, my younger sister, and my grandma make up my family of four. My mother has been taking care of my grandma, who has been bedridden for a long time, virtually nonstop, and hardly ever leaves the house. As a result, I now provide for our family financially while my mother spends her time taking care of my grandma. To make a living and pay for our household expenses, I work several jobs. Our family couldn't survive without my assistance, yet the days are difficult as I juggle job and housework. As usual, I notice my mother Sandra taking care of my grandmother when I get home from work. Mom, you've worked hard today. Hello, Christina, welcome back. You must be worn out from your job. Despite her pleasant smile, my mother had noticeable bags under her eyes. Mom, are you getting enough sleep? It's difficult to find the time because I'm always keeping an eye on Grandma. But this is my job, she laughs every time. She is considerate and consistently loyal to our family. My father passed away when I was 12 years old, and since then, my mother has been raising me and my sister, Brittany, who is 10 years younger, all by herself. She worked late into the night to support us, leaving little time to take care of us. Therefore, we were raised with the help of my grandmother, who prepared our meals and took care of us while I also helped take care of Brittany. After graduating from high school, I did not go to college but started working immediately to help with our finances. However, when my grandmother fell ill and needed care, my mother had to quit her job, and our livelihood depended on my income and my grandmother's small pension. My mother often apologized, but I also wanted to do everything I could for my family. My sister, Brittany, now a high school student, did not understand the struggles my mother and I faced at all. She didn't work part-time and spent her days hanging out with friends and barely studying. Seeing her like this made me feel conflicted. While I started working and managing household duties, and my mother was exhausted from caring for my grandmother, Brittany was immersed in her own world. My mother said, "Brittany's still in high school, so we need to let her enjoy herself," and never spoke harshly to her. Indeed, it is a fun time, but I wished Brittany would grasp our family situation more realistically. Mom, are we out of money again? I want to go to a party with my friends. A noisy voice came from the entrance. It was my sister, Brittany, clacking her heels as she entered. Brittany, didn't I already give you your allowance this month? It's not enough. And Mom, you're always just taking care of Grandma and never paying attention to me. My mother smiled troublingly. Brittany, I'm sorry, but we don't have much money to spare. Brittany clicked her tongue and slammed her bag down. Ew, this is the worst. Why was I born into this family? I twitched my brow at those words. Brittany, have you ever considered how fortunate you are? What? That's easy for you to say, Christina, since you have your own money to spend because you work. If you think so, why don't you earn some money yourself? Brittany glared at me but soon pulled out her smartphone and began typing something. She just wouldn't listen. My mother continued to spoil Brittany, and as Brittany graduated from high school, she neither worked nor continued her education. Instead, she began leading a life full of outings with friends, seeking a luxurious lifestyle. She often said, "I love Japan," inspired by a trip she had taken in the past, and would frequently talk about opening a Japanese restaurant in Hawaii someday. Hey, Mom, if I open a restaurant in Hawaii, will you help me one day? Brittany asked my mother with sparkling eyes. My mother smiled, surprised yet pleased. That would be wonderful, but Brittany, you need money to open a restaurant. It'll be fine. I'll make it work somehow. I sighed involuntarily. Brittany, opening a restaurant isn't as easy as you think. Shouldn't you start by working and gaining some experience? Ha! Christina, you really have no dreams, do you? Brittany laughed in disbelief. Dreams, huh? Indeed, I never really had any dreams. All I ever thought about was supporting this family. But Brittany's dreams seemed far too detached from reality. And then, a few days later, an incident occurred. One weekend night, as I was returning home from work, it had become completely dark outside, with only the streetlights dimly lighting the path. Suddenly, I checked my smartphone and saw several missed calls from Brittany. I had a bad feeling. Sighing, I called her back, and she answered immediately. "Christina, please, I need your help." Her voice was unusually frantic. In the background, I could hear the murmur of many people. "Brittany, what happened? I got into trouble. Please come pick me up." Again, Brittany had been going out night after night, and her drinking habits were getting worse. Getting into trouble while drunk was not uncommon for her. "Brittany, where are you?" "In front of the downtown club. Please hurry." Reluctantly, I drove to where Brittany was. There were a few police officers standing in front of the club, and Brittany was sitting on the ground. She had a scratch on her cheek, and her hair was disheveled. A man in a suit was frowning as he spoke with the police officers. "Are you her sister?" one of the police officers asked me. "Yes, what happened?" "It seems she hassled this gentleman over some drinks, and what started as a verbal altercation escalated when she hit him," the officer said. I involuntarily looked down at Brittany. She awkwardly avoided my eyes. "No, that's not it. I just drank too much." "But you did hit him, didn't you?" the police officer said sternly. "Yes, I'm sorry." Brittany was arrested on the spot. When we got home, my mother was waiting in the living room, looking worried. As soon as she saw me, she rushed over. "Where's Brittany? What happened?" I took a deep breath and chose my words as calmly as I could. "Brittany, she's been arrested." My mother's face instantly turned pale. "Arrested? Why? What did she do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I briefly explained the situation to her. My mother sat down on the sofa, speechless for a while. "My Brittany," she murmured in shock. Despite her distress, she anxiously asked, "She's not hurt, is she?" Watching her, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. It felt like this was far from over. Fortunately, Brittany was released the next day, as it was her first offense and the victim chose not to press charges. Though she was sternly warned by the police, Brittany seemed indifferent, as if it didn't involve her. "Make sure this never happens again," they had said. But her expression showed no remorse, and she seemed dissatisfied. Even after returning home, she didn't reflect on her actions, repeating excuses like, "It wasn't a big deal," and "I was just unlucky." My mother gently admonished her, "Please don't do this again." But she didn't scold her any more than that. Watching this, I couldn't contain my anger. Why wasn't she scolding her more strictly? Brittany's unrepentant demeanor only fueled my irritation, and a rage built up inside me. "Enough already? You were only saved because the other party didn't press charges, but it could have been much worse." Brittany looked away, annoyed. "So what?" she muttered. "It's not a big deal." Unable to hold back my anger any longer, I snapped. "Not a big deal? If that's what you really think, then I give up. Next time, it could really be the end of your life." My harsh tone finally made Brittany fall silent. "Christina, don't be so angry. Brittany is repentant, isn't she?" my mother said with a troubled smile, placing her hand gently on Brittany's shoulder, as if trying to smooth things over. Brittany's behavior, defended by my mother, only increased my irritation. "Repentant? She's not," I said coldly, crossing my arms. "I've told you before, Brittany's drinking habits are terrible. Every time she drinks, she yells loudly and hassles people. I've been embarrassed by her many times. Remember how many times I've had to pick her up? Can't she stop already?" "Shut up. I don't want to hear a lecture." Brittany slumped on the sofa, sulking, and didn't respond to my words. The next morning, I was still troubled by the previous day's events. But Brittany? She was eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. She munched on bread, fiddling with her smartphone, looking like yesterday's turmoil had never occurred. Seeing this, I sighed. No matter what I said, it didn't seem to resonate with Brittany. As this realization set in, a sense of emptiness grew within me. "Hey, Mom, can you lend me some money? I need to relieve some stress and go shopping." "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Money? Brittany, What are you talking about? I just need a change of scenery. Christina, it has nothing to do with you, so leave me alone. Nothing to do with me? Don't joke around. I couldn't hold back my anger and glared at Brittany. Have you already forgotten about yesterday? Do you even understand what you did? Oh, be quiet. It's over, isn't it? Brittany answered, annoyed while fiddling with her smartphone. It's over? Don't joke around. Brittany sighed heavily, obviously annoyed. Christina, you're so persistent. I clenched my fists in frustration and anger. My mother looked on at our exchange, her gaze filled with unease. Mom, please? Brittany reached out to her. Just a little? My mother hesitated, then began to open her wallet. I reached out to stop her. No, don't do this, Mom. But stop indulging Brittany. She hasn't reflected on yesterday's incident at all. Nothing will change at this rate. Christina, you're really cold, you know? Brittany muttered while still fiddling with her smartphone. I didn't reply any further. I just realized that talking more would be futile. As the days continued, my grandmother's condition visibly worsened. She had been bedridden for a long time, but recently she had been eating very little, and her consciousness had become more clouded. Grandma, how are you today? My mother peered worriedly into her face. When she grasped her thin hand, my grandmother faintly opened her eyes. Sandra. Her voice was hoarse, as if it would disappear at any moment. Mom, shouldn't we take Grandma to the hospital? I suggested. But my mother just shook her head sadly. I've consulted with the hospital many times, but the doctor said it wouldn't be strange if she passed away at any time now. Hearing that, I felt a tightening in my chest. Was her condition that bad? Despite knowing it, I had somehow convinced myself that she was still okay. That night, my grandmother quietly passed away. My mother cried, holding her hand, and I just stood there in shock. The next day, the funeral was held, and relatives and neighbors gathered. My mother wept as she looked at my grandmother's face, unable to move for a while. I stood by her side, silently watching. After the funeral, we returned home to a quiet, changed space. The house felt colder without my grandmother, and my heart sank. My mother sat on the sofa, looking exhausted, spending a long time in silence. I sat next to her, feeling time pass without saying a word. It felt as though time had stopped inside the house. The warm atmosphere that my grandmother had created was gone, replaced by silence. Meanwhile, Brittany sat on the sofa with a sullen face, playing with her smartphone. Hey, I just wonder if we can get any donations while my mother and I were immersed in grief. Brittany casually asked, What? I glared at her in disbelief. Well, if there's money coming in, I kind of want some, you know. Brittany, that's enough. It was rare for my mother to get angry, but Brittany shrugged without any sign of remorse. Calm down, it's just a joke. Don't get so mad. After my grandmother's death, my mother spent her days sitting listlessly, doing nothing, just passing time quietly. The loss of my grandmother was immeasurable for her. My grandmother had been a psychological support for my mother, with whom she had a long-standing bond. But now that she was gone, my mother had lost that support and gradually began to depend more on Brittany. Every morning, my mother started by knocking on Brittany's door. Brittany, what are your plans for today? It was as if she was seeking direction for her own day, asking every morning. Even when going shopping, my mother always invited Brittany. I don't want to go alone. Brittany, can you come with me? What seemed like a casual request at first became a source of annoyance for my mother if Brittany refused. Whenever Brittany spoke kindly, my mother would look relieved, as if she had been saved. Seeing this, my heart ached. I understood my mother's loneliness, but I was uneasy about her excessive dependence on my sister. As my mother's dependency deepened, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier, and misunderstandings between my mother and me began to arise. But for Brittany, none of this seemed to matter. Hey, Mom, it's about time you cheered up, Brittany said lightly while playing with her smartphone. There's no point in being SAD forever. Hey, why don't we go to Hawaii? I grimaced. What are you talking about? Well, Grandma has passed away, and you don't have to take care of her anymore. Mom, you've been tied to the house for so long. Wouldn't it be nice to live in Hawaii and change your mood? Brittany seemed as if she had come up with a great idea, smiling brightly at my mother. I couldn't contain my anger. Brittany, stop joking. Grandma just died a month ago, you know. So what? Staying home will just make you depressed. Besides, it has nothing to do with you, Christina, does it? Irrelevant. I'm the one supporting this house. Ah, whatever. Mom, what are you going to do? My mother didn't say anything for a while. However, her expression seemed uncertain. I felt anxious. Surely, she wasn't seriously considering Brittany's suggestion. That night, I collapsed into bed, utterly exhausted. With so many things to consider, home, work, my mother, and Brittany, it was hard even to sleep. 2 months had passed since my grandmother's death, and my emotions had somewhat stabilized. As usual, when I returned home from work, the house was eerily silent. Mom? No response. I checked the entrance. Neither my mother's nor Brittany's shoes were there. As I entered the living room, I noticed something was off. The furniture was in place, but my mother's and Brittany's belongings were gone. It was as if they had never been there at all. Then I noticed a letter on the table. To Christina, we are moving to Hawaii. For Brittany, she only has me now. Grandma is gone, and I want to be there for her. Thank you for everything. I am grateful to you. Please take care of yourself. From Mom. After reading the letter, I stood there in silence, disbelieving. No, I didn't want to believe it. Don't joke with me. My mother had chosen Brittany over me. Despite how hard I worked to support the family and help her care for my grandmother, she had abandoned everything to move to Hawaii with Brittany. A mix of anger and emptiness surged within me. My thoughts were a jumble, and I couldn't sleep that night. Anger welled up, then despair. Each time I tried to sleep, I couldn't close my eyes. The words and thoughts in my mind expanded in the silence. The next day, I was awakened by a notification sound from my smartphone. It was from the bank. Suspicious attempts to withdraw from your cash card have been detected. I immediately opened the app. There were records of multiple attempts to withdraw money from my cash card that morning. I understood instantly. It was my mother and Brittany. They had even tried to use my money. Trembling with anger, I immediately contacted the bank to block my cash card. And just to be safe, I also suspended my credit cards. Are they stupid or something? I muttered and finally felt a slight calm. I had seen their actions coming. A little while ago, my mother had suddenly asked to borrow money. I found it strange at first, but couldn't refuse her and reluctantly lent her the money. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but something had felt off. Then, one day, I noticed documents about properties in Hawaii spread out on the table at home. There were many photos of houses and apartments in Hawaii with detailed information. At that moment, I realized my mother and Brittany were planning to live in Hawaii. Shock mingled with past events rushed through my mind. Perhaps my mother's request for a loan had been for this purpose. I wondered if there was some hidden intention behind it. That's why I had already changed the settings on my cards to restrict overseas use. My mother and Brittany would find themselves empty-handed in Hawaii. I thought calmly about what to do next. There's no need for me to stay in this house. Neither Brittany nor my mother needs me, right? It's time to end this. I'll leave this house and start a new life. As I was packing my things, the phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated for a moment but decided to answer. What do you want? I said coldly. Well, actually, there's something I need to tell you, Christina. My mother's voice trembled slightly. What now? I know all about how you and Brittany tried to use my money without permission. I responded calmly. I was surging with anger, but reminded myself not to become emotional. It wasn't supposed to be like this, but Brittany just wouldn't listen, my mother said vaguely. So what? You betrayed me for Brittany? I pressed her firmly. It's not like that, but for Brittany. I thought living in Hawaii was best for opening a Japanese restaurant there. That was. Her voice sounded confused. That's enough, Mom. You're too lenient with Brittany. Have you forgotten how hard I've worked? My voice trembled, but I continued coldly. What do you think I've been working so hard for? I've seen all the attempts to withdraw money. My mother said nothing. Silence followed for a while. Finally, she spoke in a small voice. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. I hung up abruptly. Almost immediately, my sister Brittany called. I answered the phone, still irritated. Christina, please help me. I don't have enough money to open the restaurant in Hawaii. Do something. Brittany's voice was desperate. Sort it out yourself. You always rely on Mom and me like this. How long do you plan to keep acting like a child? If you need money, why don't you get a job? I chose my words harshly. There's no reason for me to help you after you targeted my money. Brittany was silent for a while. Then finally she said, I didn't mean it like that. It's too late for any excuses. This is it for us. I was cold in my dismissal. After hanging up, I told myself, this is the end. I blocked my mother and Brittany's contacts. As I prepared to leave the house, the bitterness and helplessness of being betrayed by them spread deep within me. Despite the lingering emotions, only bitterness remained. I had worked desperately for the family, but in the end, they only thought of using me. It was time to end that relationship. Thus, I left the house and started a new life. Living alone for the first time felt somewhat unsettling, but I gained peaceful, undisturbed moments. I woke up at my preferred time in the morning and spent time after work just for myself. Having worked for my family before, I now had the luxury to invest in myself. I started studying for career advancement and even attempted to acquire certifications I had always been interested in. Every day was fulfilling, a stark contrast to my previous life, bound by family. A few months later, I was promoted and my salary increased. With no worry of my family taking my money, I could save freely. I traveled and bought things I liked for myself. This is truly my life, I realized with satisfaction as I sipped my coffee. Later, curiosity got the better of me, and I checked social media. Though I had resolved to stay uninvolved, against my intentions, part of me still thought about them. Glancing at my sister Brittany's account, I saw a post screaming, "Helpy, life in Hawaii is tough. Can't find a job. I don't know what to do anymore." Desperate words filled her timeline. I couldn't help but laugh. In the end, they couldn't manage anything. They probably realized that the life they had depended on me. Christina, please help. A message from Brittany appeared on social media. The confident Brittany I knew was gone, replaced by desperate, almost tearful words. Yet, my heart remained unmoved. The old me would have helped without hesitation. But not anymore. I deleted the message without even reading it. After closing the screen, I felt as if something had been lifted off me. I was no longer their convenient person. They had chosen their path. They had to take responsibility for it. I set down my phone and murmured quietly while sipping my coffee. They made their bed. Now they must lie in it.